Hi. One of the most common questions I'm asked when teaching kids to sew is, what needle should I use? So today I'm hopefully going to dispel the myth that little kids need big, thick, fat and blunt needles to sew with. So let's begin. Okay, sorry, I forgot to tell you, my name is Trixie Simons and you can find me over at sewasofty.com where I give you tips, tricks and projects to help you sew with your kids. Now we can get started. Okay, so this here is a thick, blunt, fat needle. It's got a nice big eye, but often parents think that this is a great needle to sew with their kids. Let's see. If I try to sew with this, it doesn't work. Okay, our next option would be a thick needle with a sharp point. Let's see how that goes. Okay, you can actually put it through the fabric, but it's really, really, really tough to pull. And if you give your kids one of these needles to sew with, they're probably not going to enjoy the sewing experience. So let me show you the sorts of needles that I like to use. So my favorite needles are what are called chenille needles. Now chenille needles come, I hope you can see, in different sizes. These are only some of the sizes, there are actually lots more. I like to use the smallest chenille needle I can find, but you can only use the small chenille needle, the smallest, if you're using a very thin cotton. If you're using something like a wool or an embroidery thread, you're going to need to use a larger chenille needle, which has a larger hole. So let's just have a quick look at the different sorts of, actually I forgot to say, you don't have to just use chenille needles. I'll put these down for the moment. You can use ordinary sewing needles, but they do have a very, very small eye, or an embroidery needle, which does have a larger eye, but it's still not as large as the chenille needles. So what I'm saying is, if you don't have a chenille needle at home and you really want to sew, any sewing needle will work, as long as you can thread it and it's got a nice sharp point and it's not too thick. So let's go over here. I'm going to show you some of the different threads that you can use. My favorite is, I just love using ordinary sewing cotton. It's nice and thin, it's easy to sew, and you can use a really tiny chenille needle to sew with. And actually, I did forget to show you how easy it is to sew with these needles. Look, it just goes in, out, really easy to pull through. Even the slightly larger chenille needles, like this one, in, out, push. So, back to the threads. So we've got the cotton, which I really like. Then some people like to use this. This is a pearl cotton. It's slightly thicker. Or some people actually like to use something a bit thicker, like wool with kids. If you're using something thick like this wool, you're not going to be able to thread it through this tiny chenille needle. You're going to need to use a bigger chenille needle like this one, or probably even something a little bit bigger. I also like, this is a nice embroidery floss that I like to use. It's an Aurifil one. It's nice and tightly woven, so it makes, even though it's a thicker thread, it's still quite easy to thread. So let's talk a little bit about threading. Okay, so one of the reasons I use this cotton, I'll just cut a little piece off, because it's easy to thread and because I can double it over. Now, people sometimes ask, or get their kids to thread the needle, which is really good. If you've got a big class, you might want to get the kids using a needle thread, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But when you're getting your kids to thread, you don't need a long bit of thread. You need a short piece of thread, just the tiny little bit that kids hold between their thumb and forefinger, and then it really makes it quite easy to thread. I'll just do it in this here. It's a smaller needle. Just the tip of your thread, and carefully, and it goes through. Now sometimes if the ends of your thread is a bit fluffy, it's a good idea just to cut it. That sometimes helps. There is the old lick and pinch method, but probably these days most people don't want to use that one. But just a tiny bit of thread through your needle, and there we go. And like I said, what I do like about using ordinary sewing cotton is I always get the kids to bring the two ends of the thread together and knot it. And that's just simply by twirling the cotton, the thread over their fingers, taking the loop off and going under and over. And the reason I do that is so that the needle doesn't pull off the thread while the kids are sewing. Now, if you're working with a large group of kids and you don't want kids being frustrated by not being able to thread their needles and you want them to get their sewing done, so there's two different sorts of needle threaders. This is the old-fashioned needle threader. Unfortunately, they don't often last very long, and this little bit here, I don't know if you can see it, breaks off really easy. But I'll show you how to do that. I'll just get a thicker thread here. And how you use this one is you just put this little wire bit of the needle threader through the eye of the needle. You just push your thread through there and then pull it through. And there you go. But of course, like I said, these little bits here fall off pretty easily, break off pretty easily. And this one is quite a good needle thread. It's called the Loran. And you just get the little hook, you push it through your needle. Kids just hook the thread around the little hook, pull it through, and they're done. Now, you might have a class of kids and you don't have needle threaders, so what are you going to do? Well, this is the Cassie Stevens Make Your Own Needle Threader. So I don't know if you can see this, but I'm going to just cut a small piece of paper, something like about 1/2 inch by about 1 inch. So just to show you, let's just pick that up. So here we go, there's your little piece of paper. Now you want to fold that in half, and you want to make that crease nice and sharp. Now the first thing you're going to do is where's my needle? Okay, here's my needle. Just check that your paper goes easily through the eye. This one does. If you want, you can just trim it a little bit. And what your kids need to do now is simply open up the little piece of paper, put your thread in the paper, close it up, and thread it through. And there we go. That's the Cassie Stevens needle threading method. So I think I've explained why I think big fat needles aren't good for your kids, and how to thread a needle, what threads I like. And yep, that's the video for today. If you have any questions about sewing with kids, I would love to answer them. Please put your comment or your question in the comments below. And if you'd like to subscribe to my channel, that would be awesome too. Thanks a lot.